My parents charged me rent since age 14, while paying everything for my brother. Now I discovered they stole $40,000 from my college fund, and their lives fell apart while I'm thriving. I'm 18 years old. I'm studying art at one of the best universities in the country. And honestly, I never thought I'd make it this far considering what the last 13 years of my life were like. I guess I should start from the beginning, or from as far back as I can remember, because what my parents did to me basically defined my entire childhood and adolescence in the worst way possible. And the crazy thing is that it all started with something as simple as a Christmas gift. When I was 5 years old, it was Christmas Eve. You know? And we were opening presents under the tree like any normal family. I was a little kid, super excited, and there were two huge gifts wrapped in shiny paper. One had my name on it, and the other had my brother Connor's name, who was like 13 years old at the time. My dad told us to open them at the same time, and when I ripped off the paper, I saw this incredible dollhouse, like one of those that has 3 floors and all the rooms furnished. I went crazy with happiness. Literally started jumping and screaming, but then I looked at Connor's gift, and it was like a basic video game console. Nothing special. And here comes the part that still hurts after all these years. My dad just walked over, snatched the dollhouse out of my hands without saying anything, and gave it to Connor, saying something like, "This one is more appropriate for you, son. We'll give her the console." Connor didn't even protest. He just laughed and accepted my gift like it was nothing. I just stood there with tears running down my face, holding this console I didn't even know how to use, and my parents acted like everything was perfectly normal. My grandparents, my mom's parents, were there that day and saw everything. They didn't say anything in the moment, but like a week later, this huge package arrived at my house with my name on it. It was from my grandparents. And when I opened it, I found not only an even nicer dollhouse than the original one, but also a note that said something like, "For our special granddaughter, with all our love," and there was something else in the box. A hand-painted wooden doghouse with my name on the door. My mom explained, super uncomfortable, that it was like a symbol that I would always have a place with them. From that day on, my grandparents basically became my real family. But at that moment, I was only 5 years old, and didn't really understand what it all meant. Things only got worse over time. Honestly, Connor was always the golden child, you know? Everything he did was perfect in my parents' eyes. He got good grades, he was good at sports, he had tons of friends. Meanwhile, I don't know, the weird artsy kid who preferred to draw and read books instead of doing the things they thought were important. My parents are both college professors, very academic and super focused on traditional success, and I guess I never fit that mold. Every time I brought home a drawing or painting I was proud of, they barely looked at it. But if Connor came home with a trophy for anything, it was like he'd won the Nobel Prize. When I was 13, Connor was starting college, and my parents decided we needed to move to a bigger, more expensive house to be closer to the campus where he was going to study. They never asked me if I wanted to move, never considered that I would have to change schools and leave my friends. Everything revolved around Connor. Always. The new house was huge, like 4 bedrooms, big yard, the whole thing. And obviously it was way beyond what we could actually afford. But my parents insisted because they wanted Connor to be able to come home on weekends and have his own space. That year for Christmas, I had been saving my allowance money for months. And when I say allowance, I'm talking about literally $5 a week, to buy Connor a watch he had mentioned he liked. It wasn't anything super expensive. I think it cost like $80. But for me, it was a fortune, and I wanted to show my brother that I loved him despite everything. Christmas morning, I gave him the gift, and he seemed genuinely happy. He put it on immediately, and everything. But then my dad saw it and said, "That watch is too good for your sister to have bought you with her money. Give it to me. I'll give it to you from me." Just like that, he took the watch from Connor, looked at me, and said, "You can give him something more appropriate for your level." I went to my room crying while I heard them laughing downstairs, and Connor never defended me, not once. But what happened when I turned 14 was the real breaking point, I guess. My parents came into my room on my birthday. I was expecting maybe a cake or a small gift or something. And instead, they told me I was old enough to start working and earning my own money. They informed me, just like that from now on I would have to pay for my own expenses, clothes, school supplies, outings with friends, everything. And it wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. My mom told me, Connor never asked us for money for these things. He was responsible. And then she added, well, he didn't need to because we gave it to him. But you have to learn the value of money. The irony was so obvious it hurt, you know? So I got a job at a clothing store after school. And on weekends. I was 14 years old, still in school, obviously, and I was working like 20 hours a week while my parents continued to pay for absolutely everything for Connor: his entire college, his car, his apartment, his outings, literally everything. I would come home after work, do my homework until midnight, and the next day, repeat the cycle. My grades started to drop a little. Nothing terrible, but they weren't perfect anymore, and my parents would punish me saying it was because I was lazy and didn't try hard enough. Never, not once, did they consider that maybe I was exhausted from working and studying, at the same time being practically a child. One day, my grandparents came to visit. I think I was like 15 years old at that point, and they saw me come home from work completely exhausted. They asked my mom why I was working at that age, and she told them quite naturally that it was to teach me responsibility. My grandparents went quiet, but I could see in their faces they were furious. They left without saying much more. But 2 days later, my parents called me into the living room and they had this weird expression, like anger mixed with panic. They told me that my grandparents had talked to them and that they thought it was unfair that I was working while Connor received everything for free. And here comes the incredible part. Instead of admitting they were being abusive to me, they gave me an ultimatum. Either I started paying rent for my room or I moved out. I was 15 years old, literally a minor, and they were asking me for rent. I don't know what I would have done if it wasn't for my grandparents, honestly. When I told them what was happening, they immediately offered for me to go live with them, but I still had this silly hope that things could get better with my parents, so I decided to stay and start paying rent. I increased my work hours, basically had no social life, and every month I gave my mom $300 for my room. $300 that I had earned working after school while I had to buy my own food most of the time, because they only cooked enough for them and Connor when he came to visit. It was surreal. Like living in an episode of some TV show about dysfunctional families. Connor graduated from college when I was like 16 years old, and he met this girl, I think her name was Michelle or something like that. They started dating, and after only 6 months, they decided to get married in Las Vegas. Just like that, out of nowhere. My parents went crazy. Not because Connor was getting married so young, but because the wedding wasn't the way they wanted it. They wanted a big, elaborate ceremony where they could show off their perfect son, but Connor and Michelle wanted something simple and cheap. My parents started interfering constantly, criticizing every decision Connor made, trying to control the relationship, and basically being a nightmare for the couple. I was watching all this from the outside, and for the first time, I felt some pity for Connor because he was finally experiencing the kind of control and manipulation I had lived with my whole life. The thing is, Connor didn't know how to handle the pressure. He started fighting with Michelle over things my parents put in his head, doubting their relationship, questioning their decisions. And like a year after they got married, Michelle filed for divorce. I don't blame her at all, honestly. Connor was devastated and moved back to the house, right when I was 17 and in my senior year of high school. He went back to his old room, stopped working for a while, and basically became the center of my parents' universe again. They consoled him constantly, cooked his favorite meals, told him Michelle wasn't good enough for him. All the prince treatment I never received for 1 second in my life. Then came my 18th birthday, and I was in the middle of my high school finals. Super stressed because I was applying to art colleges and needed to keep my grades high, despite still working like 25 hours a week. I got home after a particularly long shift, like 10 at night, and my parents were waiting for me in the living room with Connor. My dad told me, without any kind of preamble, that they needed my room for Connor and I had to leave. Just like that, you have to go, pack your things. I told them I was in the middle of my finals, that I had 2 weeks left to finish school, and my mom literally told me, that's your problem. Connor needs his space and you're already an adult. You can manage on your own. I was in shock, I think. I mean, I knew my parents treated me badly, but I never thought they would literally kick me out of the house 2 weeks before graduating. From high school. I asked them where I was supposed to go, and my dad said, with your grandparents, I suppose. You've always been more their daughter than ours anyway. That hurt more than I can explain, you know? Because it was true in a way. but hearing it from his mouth was like confirming they had never really loved me. I packed what I could that same night while crying, and Connor just watched me from the door of his future room without saying anything. I called my grandparents from a friend's car who came to pick me up, and they told me to come immediately, that my room had always been waiting for me. Living with my grandparents was like entering a different world, literally. For the first time in years, someone asked how my day was, and actually wanted to know the answer. My grandmother cooked me breakfast before going to school. My grandfather helped me with my college applications. It was the kind of normal family life I had seen in my friends' houses, but had never experienced. I finished my finals, graduated with honors despite everything. My parents didn't go to my graduation. By the way, they said they had something important to do. And I started to feel for the first time that maybe my life didn't have to be miserable forever. Like 2 months after I moved in with my grandparents, my parents showed up at the door. They weren't coming to apologize or ask how I was. They were coming to ask for money. Turns out without my $300 monthly of rent, plus all the other expenses I covered for myself, they were having trouble paying the mortgage on their too expensive house. My dad, with a completely serious face, told me it was my responsibility to help them because I was part of the family. I laughed in his face. I couldn't help it. I told them, "Really? Now I'm part of the family? Not when you kicked me out before my finals? Not when you made me pay rent at 15? My mom started crying, saying I was being cruel, that they had just been preparing me for the real world. I told them to leave and not come back. My grandparents, who had heard the whole conversation from the living room, came out and told my parents they needed to talk to them. I went to my room, but I could hear raised voices. Afterwards, when my parents left, my grandparents called me and told me something that changed everything. They explained that they had a will where they were originally going to split their inheritance between my mom and her brother, my uncle. But after seeing how they had treated me for years, they had decided to change everything. Now, the part that was supposed to go to my mom was going to go directly to me, and my parents weren't going to receive anything. It wasn't a fortune or anything, but it was enough to pay for my college and have some financial stability. A week later, my grandparents called my parents for a family meeting and informed them about the change in the will. I was there, sitting on the couch, while my parents went crazy. My dad yelled at me that I was a manipulator, that I had poisoned my grandparents against them, that I was ungrateful after everything they had done for me. I asked them, "What exactly did you do for me? Make me work since I was 14? Charge me rent as a minor? Kick me out before my finals?" My mom was crying, saying that Connor also deserved that money. How could I be so selfish? My grandparents finally asked them to leave and not contact me anymore unless it was to truly apologize. Meanwhile, I had applied to several art schools and had been accepted to the best one in the state, my dream university. When I received the acceptance letter, I cried with happiness for the first time in years. My grandparents immediately told me not to worry about the money, that they would cover the full tuition. It was surreal. You know? My whole life I had worked and fought for every little thing, and now I finally had someone who believed in me and wanted to support me. I felt guilty for being so happy knowing my parents were struggling financially, but I also felt like I was finally getting some cosmic justice after years of mistreatment. Things got weirder when Connor contacted me like a month later. He sent me a message saying he needed to talk to me, that it was urgent. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop, and when he arrived he looked terrible, like he had lost weight and had dark circles under his eyes. He told me he needed me to lend him money, that he was in a desperate situation. I asked him what had happened, and he basically told me that our parents had been pressuring him to get a well-paying job immediately after college, but that he had wanted to take some time to decide what to do. They pressured him so much that he ended up accepting a job he hated, got depressed, and eventually quit. Now he had no job, no money, and our parents were pressuring him to ask me for money because they knew I had access to the grandparents' savings. I asked him directly, "Did you know everything they did to me? When they kicked me out? When they made me pay rent? When they treated me like garbage?" Connor was quiet for a moment and then admitted that yes, he had always known, but he was afraid to say something because he didn't want to lose our parents' favor. He confessed something else to me. That the day they kicked me out, Michelle, his ex-wife, had been at the house and had witnessed everything. She had told him that if he didn't defend me, if he let our parents treat me like that, she couldn't be with someone so cowardly. That was the real reason Michelle filed for divorce, not all the nonsense our parents had made up about her not being good enough. Connor had lost his wife because he chose to protect his position as the golden child instead of doing the right thing. I don't know what I felt in that moment. Honestly. On one hand, I was furious, because Connor had had so many opportunities to help me, and he never did. On the other hand, he was finally understanding that he was also a victim of our parents, just in a different way. They had turned him into someone so dependent on their approval that he was willing to sacrifice his own happiness and relationships to keep them happy. I told him I wasn't going to give him money, but that if he really wanted to fix things with me, he had to start by confronting our parents about everything they had done. Connor said he would think about it and left. Like 2 weeks later, Connor went to my parents' house. He was still living with them at that point, and told them everything. He yelled at them for ruining his marriage with their constant interference, for treating me like garbage, for creating this toxic family dynamic where I was the scapegoat and he was the perfect son who couldn't make mistakes. My grandparents told me all this because apparently the neighbors heard the shouting and called my grandparents worried. Connor packed his things and left, cut contact with my parents, and moved into a cheap apartment with some friends. I heard later that my parents finally lost the house because they couldn't pay the mortgage without my rent, and without being able to pressure Connor to contribute. They had to move to a small apartment in a low-income area, a dramatic fall from their previous lifestyle. I started college, and honestly, it was the best time of my life up to that point. I was studying something I loved. I had professors who recognized my talent. I had made incredible friends who became my chosen family. My grandparents came to visit me all the time, took me out to eat, asked me about my classes. It was the kind of parental support I had always wanted. For the first time in my life, I felt valued and seen as a person, not as a disappointment or a burden. My parents posted a long post on Facebook, like one of those dramatic things older people do when they want attention, saying that I was an illegitimate daughter, that I wasn't really my dad's daughter, and that's why they had treated me differently my whole life. It was completely false. By the way, I had seen my birth certificate and knew it was a total lie. But they posted it to try to explain their behavior and gain sympathy from their friends and family. The crazy thing was it completely backfired on them. People started commenting things like, even if it were true, that doesn't justify charging rent to a minor, or, what kind of parents kick out their daughter before her final exams? Some relatives I didn't even know well came out to defend me, saying they had always noticed the differential treatment but didn't know how bad it was. My grandparents saw the post and were furious. They threatened to sue them for defamation if they didn't delete it immediately. My parents deleted it, but the damage to their reputation was already done. Basically, their entire social community now knew they had been abusive to me, and many people stopped talking to them. My mom sent me like 20 text messages saying I had ruined their lives, that because of me they had no friends, that I was a horrible person. I blocked them on everything. One day, I was going through some old documents with my grandparents, like organizing papers for taxes and stuff, when my grandfather found something weird. Turns out my grandparents had established an education fund for me when I was born, separate from their main inheritance, specifically for my college. They had given control to my mom when I was 10 years old, with the explicit condition that it only be used for my education. My grandparents assumed that money was still there, but when we checked, the account was empty. My parents had withdrawn all the money, like $40,000, and had used it over the years for their own enjoyment, trips, house renovations, who knows what else. They never intended to pay for my college. They literally stole my education fund. My grandparents were devastated. They felt guilty for not having checked before. I was angrier than I had been in this whole situation, because this proved that my parents never, not for 1 second, had planned to support me in any way. They had watched me work like crazy since I was 14, knowing they had $40,000 that were mine, and never said anything. My grandparents considered legal action, but in the end we decided it wasn't worth the stress. They were already covering my college anyway, and pursuing my parents legally would only prolong contact with them. Connor eventually contacted me again, like 6 months after his confrontation with our parents. He asked me if we could meet, and this time he looked completely different. Healthier, calmer. He told me he had been going to therapy, that he was working at a job he really liked, and that he had started dating someone new. Most importantly, he told me he was so sorry for everything that had happened, that he completely understood if I never wanted to have a relationship with him, but that he wanted me to know he finally understood how horrible everything had been and that he was trying to be a better person. He told me he had completely cut contact with our parents and that he planned to keep it that way. I decided to give Connor a chance, honestly. It wasn't instant or easy, but we started rebuilding something, like a sibling relationship. We talked every 2 weeks, met for coffee from time to time. He told me his new girlfriend was pregnant and he was going to be a dad, and that he was terrified of repeating our parents' patterns with his own child. I told him that the fact he was aware of that already put him light years ahead of them. We talked about our childhood in an honest way for the first time. He admitted that even being the favorite, the pressure and constant expectations had damaged him in ways he was still discovering. It didn't justify what he had done, but at least now he understood that we had both been hurt by the same toxic source. My parents tried to contact me several more times during the next year. Once they showed up at my university trying to find me, but security escorted them out. Another time they sent me a super long letter saying they forgave me for everything I had done to them, as if I was the one who needed forgiveness. I read it, laughed, and threw it away. I had nothing to say to them, and honestly didn't feel any need to close that door in any formal way. Some people don't deserve your emotional energy, you know? And they had exhausted anything I could have felt for them years ago. I'm in my second year of college now, and things are better than I ever imagined. My work is being exhibited in local galleries. I have a group of friends who are like family. My grandparents are proud of every little thing I do. Connor and I have a cordial relationship. He sends me pictures of his baby, and sometimes we talk about how we're both going to make sure the next generation of our family breaks these toxic cycles. My parents, as far as I know, are still in their small apartment, still bitter, still not really understanding what they did wrong. And honestly, I don't care anymore. I don't give them space in my head anymore. Last week, my grandmother came to visit me and I was showing her my most recent paintings. I told her that when I have my first professional exhibition, I want to dedicate the entire collection to her and Grandpa, because without them I wouldn't be here, literally. She started crying and told me that seeing that I managed to succeed despite everything was the best gift she could receive. And I think that's the thing, right? In the end, my parents lost 2 children, lost their house, lost their reputation, lost the respect of their community, all because of their sick need to have control and maintain this facade of a perfect family around Connor. And me, the one who was supposedly the failure, the disappointment, I found a real family with the people who valued me for who I am. I'm doing what I love, and I'm finally happy. I don't know if that counts as poetic justice or what, but it feels good, I guess.